Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Built in California series where I'm shining a light on some incredible startups doing amazing things, disrupting markets, and really changing the world from the way that it is to the way that it's going to be in the future. With me on the line is the CEO of TechSmarter, Eddie Green. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, the privilege is really all mine. So, Eddie, kick us off. I always ask our guests for the elevator pitch. You're not just the CEO of TechSmarter. You come from quite a wealthy background in the sense of experience in building and scaling startups and investing in startups and things like that. But why don't you take the reins from me at this point and give the world your elevator pitch? What do we need to know? Kick us off.
Well, so TechSmarter is in the business of capturing text. And what we do is we take text from mobile devices, desktop applications, any app that can deliver any multimedia. So it's anywhere from SMS, MMS. We handle Signal as well as iMessage, and we're the only folks out there that handle iMessage. And the company is uniquely positioned in that we've developed a solution that is completely transparent to the user. All the user needs to do is give their credentials and allow permission for text to be captured. And that's incredibly important for the finance community. Right now, there's a lot of regulatory scrutiny. People need to be able to preserve those. It has to become part of the forensic record. And FINRA has just recently changed the regulations, and the banks are looking at that very closely, and they're trying to determine the best way forward. And we think we're uniquely positioned in the marketplace to offer a truly unique solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eddie, what's your background? I mean, prior to TechSmarter, what's your claim to fame there?
So when I was a young guy, 22, 23, I started my first networking company, Ring Access, which I sold. Then I ran a company, Basys Automation Systems, out of Langley, London. We were building newsroom systems pretty much for all international broadcasters worldwide. Grew that to a fair number of seats in the thousands. Then sold that to Avid in Tewksbury, Mass. Then I went on to do venture capital. I've been doing venture capital for 26 years. I've done everything from passively Q-switch lasers to cellular base station amplifiers, oil and gas exploration technology, fintech. And about a couple of years ago, I invested in TechSmarter, and now I'm the CEO. And the reason that I've stepped in as CEO is we've got huge growth potential in front of us. We're at an inflection point. So we just closed our round, and we're busy building out what we think will be a world-class solution.
So the problem that you guys solve, Eddie, from my understanding, is a compliance issue for financial services companies, as an example. What is the problem? Give us the headline here. Why does this problem that TechSmarter is solving so important for the world today?
So let's start with the finance industry. So here's what's happening. The workforce is getting younger. Everybody's used to texting. They're used to using mobile devices. It's just become part of the day-to-day flow. And so banks recognize that. But the problem is you can't just, you have to take in text. If you're going to use text to communicate with your customers, it has to be part of the record. The financial industry is heavily regulated. It's important that people keep track of all emails, they keep track of any audio communications. And what's happened to date is companies are saying, well, we don't know how to deal with this texting issue. So what we're going to do is we're just going to disable it. But that's not really addressing where the market's going in the future. Everybody wants to be moving toward texting. It's just part of the ongoing business imperative. So, and the other problem is that employees use their phones. So the dirty little secret in the trade is that, look, your phone is discoverable. If there's a problem, it doesn't matter if you've incorporated into the archive. You're still liable for it. So now you're faced with the problem of, well, my customers want to use texting. I need to support texting. I'm going to have the phones be discoverable anyway, so I might as well ingest it and take it in as part of the corporate record and integrate it into our business process. And that's what's really compelling the industry.
So, Eddie, how hard is this problem? So obviously you guys aggregate texting platforms, Signal, iMessage, WhatsApp as an example. How hard is this to actually pull off? So if you think about iMessage, for instance, my understanding is like that's probably one of the hardest things to possibly crack, because it's completely closed. Apple's ecosystem is closed unless you're an Apple user. So how hard is this thing that you guys have actually solved?
It's actually incredibly hard. Um, there are a number of solutions out there, and some are carrier dependent, some have wrappers. We don't think those are true solutions. We think that those are, our term is a hack. What we've done is we took a fair number of years and probably hundreds of false starts to unwind the Apple universe and find the exact right spot in the architectural stack where we can integrate in, where we're transparent. The issue is going forward, if you're a large bank and you've got 80,000 seats, you have to think about what happens when new iOS upgrades come out, what happens when the apps routinely get updated. You can't have a disruption to service. And so it's very important to pick exactly where you fit into that stack so that you don't have any disruptions. We finally have solved that problem. And it took an incredible amount of time to do and a lot of effort. So the company's strategy was to remain below the radar, really focus on those technical issues, nail them up, and really have solid solutions. Then we went out and we just closed our Series A round, and we're starting to build a system for scale. Having solved the problem and having demonstrated we can do it very effectively for a small number of users, now we're going to blow it up and support hundreds of thousands of users.
So, Eddie, you touched on the fact that you guys are closing your current funding round. You obviously come from a venture capital background. A lot of my audience are also startups trying to build and scale things. Now being where you are and having worn both hats, obviously your most current one being, the startup CEO, if you like, and then having previously worn the hat of a venture capitalist. What do you know to be true about venture capital that you feel a lot of startups don't get about raising money when you're trying to scale like TechSmarter is today?
So when I sit on boards, I caution entrepreneurs about a couple of things. The first golden rule that you should never forget is don't raise money when you need it. And the problem is companies wait too long and they just assume that they can go out and negotiate at the final hour. It doesn't work that way. Venture guys are in the business of making smart investments, and they negotiate very hard. And so I caution everybody, you have to think very carefully about your milestones. You have to think very carefully about your timeline, and you need to be out in front of it and raising money in advance of truly needing it. So that's one of the big rules. The second rule is you have to be very precise in your pitch. You don't have a lot of time. Typically, I'll see 40 deals a week sometimes. And so, you have to get the attention of the investor very quickly. And there are a couple things that are red flags that I think people should pay attention to. The first is don't misrepresent anything. Venture guys have heard a lot of pitches, and they are very good about figuring out when there's been an inconsistency. So you need to be very precise about what you have. If you don't know the answer to something, be honest. Tell them you don't know. That's a big one. And the other one is be very careful about throwaway lines. For example, one of the most irritating is somebody coming in and saying, the market is a $400 billion opportunity, and we're just going to get 1% of it. Oh, great. You're going to get 1%. So everybody just feels like you're a good person and they're going to give you 1%. That doesn't mean a thing to me. I want to know, how are you going to get that 1%? Believe it or not, competition is fierce, and they're not going to let you just move in and take it over for free. So you better have a pretty articulate plan of exactly how you're going to do this and why you're going to be able to be successful at it.
So, Eddie, I'm curious. I believe timing is a big thing. And there's a TED talk by Bill Gross. He's built multiple billion-dollar businesses, and basically he looked at like .com, startups that failed. He looked at those that did succeed, Airbnb, Uber, and the many others that he was successful at. And he made the point. He said, everyone's talking about business models. Everyone's talking about the team. Everyone's talking about execution. and having a clearly defined market and all this kind of stuff, and having enough cash to burn. And he said all these things are actually very important, but the number one reason that startups fail is because of timing. He said because if you're too early, you don't get the scale. Like for instance, Netflix would have failed, when we had dial-up modems as an example. But so timing is obviously a very important point. You landed that also. You said know when is the right time to raise money. When is the right time? Like, what do you advise or think about? When is the right time to actually raise money? It's because you've got seed companies raising seed capital, pre-revenue, don't have a product, they're trying to figure out what nail to hit, and then you've got growth stage startups who know what nail to hit, they're at product market fit, they just want to put more fuel in the engine and challenge the Klingons for interstellar domination. But timing, unpack that for us. What have you learned about that?
Markets take a long time to evolve. It's hard to establish a foothold. It takes a lot harder and a lot more effort than entrepreneurs typically think. So what I caution people is go slow. Really control your spending. Stay focused on learning all the things you have to learn about the technical solution you're bringing to market. And then be realistic about how long it's going to take to incorporate feedback from the customer. Whatever you develop in the lab is not likely what the marketplace is going to want. It's probably mostly going to be there, but there are going to be some things that you're going to have to tune. And so that's what I call phone booth development. If you sit in the phone booth and you just develop without any input from the rest of the world, you might spend a fortune doing it, take 18 months, roll out to market, only to find out that it's not quite what the market wants. So the better solution, in my opinion, is get something that works, get out into conversations with customers, incorporate as much feedback as you can, control your expenses, bring that back through. Once you're sure you've got a fair cross-section of folks and you've hit that kind of sweet spot, then go raise your money. And be very clear about the types of things, the reasons you're raising money. You might be raising money because you need to develop a more robust architecture. You might be raising money because you now have deployed it and you need to really hit scale. But it's very important to understand, why you're raising money and what that money is going to be used for. It changes over time. So, for example, at TechSmarter right now, 60% of our budget is going into engineering. That will change coming up right around Q1. It'll probably switch more to 35-40% engineering and more 30% into customer satisfaction. We're very focused on enterprise support. So, our budget reflects that. And when we raised money, we were very clear about what the transition is going to look like and what our anticipated plan is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of seed stage companies, or they maybe do Series A, they're all about the product, right? Like they're not interested in kind of taking something to market at scale just yet for obvious reasons. You don't want to have 100,000 users and not be able to commercialize them sufficiently. At what point do you feel is the right time for a startup to actually be going to market aggressively with a product?
If you can do it, I recommend picking a couple of customers and really focusing on the experience with those customers. The part that startups often forget about is how hard it is to support a customer. So I would encourage people to really think about that customer support, making sure that you've built out the processes to get the feedback going to engineering to QA, and you got the whole loop going. And I think that what you do is you pick a handful and you focus on them like a laser. You get that right. Once you've got that and it's been a forcing function for the support you need, then I think you can really kind of roll out and go much more broadly. So what I often find is startups are desperate in the beginning for customers. So they'll do suboptimal things. For example, you'll try rolling out to the UAE first when you're out of California. That's really hard to do. That's a lot of time zone difference. There's a language barrier. So it's very hard to say no, but a lot of times the correct thing to do is say no and really stick to your knitting and find something local that you can be successful at. It makes a huge difference.
Hmm. So, from an engineering perspective, what is TechSmarter doing to kind of elicit feedback from the right customers or niche? Because obviously, you guys solve a pretty big problem for a lot of customers around compliance. But what are you doing as a team from an engineering and customer engagement perspective to ensure that you guys have the best scale ready product imaginable?
So we don't let engineering lead that discussion. We let the product marketing group lead that discussion. The product marketing group is in charge of talking to the customer, understanding the use cases, talking through exactly how this is going to be deployed. That then gets incorporated into a product requirements document that goes to engineering. Now, engineering is intimately involved in that process as we go along, but it's always the outward facing portion always comes from product marketing, and I think that's really key. Making sure that you have the right interaction with the customer. What we're focused on right now is developing a series of tight relationships where we're watching how people are using it, we're tracking the type of data they're using, and we're incorporating all that feedback and taking that back to engineering. Now, one of the things that we've really focused on, if you're a large bank, for example, and you've got requirements, let's say for 80,000 seats, 50,000 seats, you're going to have a lot of skepticism. Okay, here's a small company coming along, and wow, we're going to trust that somehow they've got the architecture that's going to prove to handle all of that reliably. So anticipating that, we've invested very heavily in what we call message injector technology, MIT. And that is a real key for us. It's a stress test that stressed our system end to end. And that is the backbone of our QA. It's the backbone of our modeling for the customers. And it's actually will be integrated into our pricing model. And so it's going to flow through the entire organization. But the crux of it and why it's so important to us is that is what proves out that we can handle scale into the hundreds of thousands. And that's built right into our base level strategic plan.
So, Eddie, am I right to assume that the message injector is really kind of an end-to-end load tester? So an enterprise customer can understand the impact of scale using your TechSmarter data warehouse or platform, if you like. Is that what the message injector does in terms of an outcome?
That's precisely it. So right now, a lot of financial institutions are not fully aware of what the composite data looks like on the network. How many videos get sent, how many GIFs, how much is just ordinary text, what's the overall load. So part of this tool, it's inbound for QA, but it's also a modeling tool for the customer to play around. So there's sliders on the user interface that allow you to say, I want to simulate 30,000 users. There's this much in the way of video traffic, this much in the way of just text. Here's what a typical load looks like. That then goes all the way through to make a recommendation saying, okay, this is more or less how it's going to be deployed. Here's how many servers you're going to need, and here's how that prices out.
Mm-hmm. So the use case then, would it be a case of, one of the use cases, would it be insider trading or making sure that there's no stock tipping happening on the messaging channels for a regulated financial services customer? Is that a good use case, or if it is, what are some of the other use cases that enterprise compliance regulated companies are going to be able to get, advantages of by working with you guys?
Yeah, so we're not in the compliance business per se. I mean, that the data gets handed off to an archive, and there are a lot of companies out there, Shield FC, SteelEye, Smarsh, that do the actual forensics compliance. So we're just a data pump that moves data from the device into that archive. So that's not what we're focused on with message injector technology. What we're really focused on is what happens when you connect up 80,000 users simultaneously to the pipe and everybody wakes up, there's been a 9/11 event, and they all start hammering their phones. Can our data pump keep up, and can it move it in real time to an archive for storage? And is that reliable? Does it ever go down? That's what that's about. It's ensuring the integrity of the pipe.
So who are you working with currently? You don't have to name drop necessarily, but is this purely a financial services play, or do you find that this initial opportunity for TechSmarter, or the initial use cases are going to exist beyond financial services?
It'll go well beyond financial services. So if you look at January 6th and the events that happened there, the text disappeared with the Secret Service. We're getting tremendous inquiries from the government agencies that now have a mandate to say, look, we can't have that happen again. We have to preserve those texts. So that's a huge area of opportunity for us. And that's not just domestically, that's worldwide. We're finding that all over the EU. That's a very common inbound query. So we'll be focused on that. And then there's huge opportunity in healthcare. There's huge opportunity in the Salesforce arena. A lot of that integration is really in a nascent stage, and we think we can be really disruptive and make a big difference in the overall flow of information in other markets. And part of what we're doing is we've built into our architecture a centrally hosted solution so that the smaller companies that can't afford their own IT can just onboard with us, and our data pipe just points to wherever you want to store that data. And we'll offer an onboarded archive solution as well, so you can go into a portal and say, look, I'm interested in just my data. I want a record of what happened with the last real estate transaction. Where are the pictures? Where was the appraisal? What got texted to who?
Mm-hmm. So talk to us a bit about the team. Obviously, you started as an investor. Now you're the CEO. But who's on the management team for TechSmarter?
So in compliance, we have Sabine Simmerommel. She's does all of our compliance and is our COO. She brings a wealth of experience. We have Sanjay Malhotra. He's our VP of North American Sales and Asia Pacific. Ashish Bhandari is the head of product marketing. He's developing all the customer requirements. We have George Sibwell, Ujwal, and Jeff Heyman are all our technical core, and they're sort of our engineering superstars that are scaling this architecture. And we have Hugh Cumberland out of the UK. That's VP of Sales there. He's managing all of the EU inbound queries.
So, what's your advice to startup founders and/or entrepreneurs about attracting and building a team that can obviously get the company to achieve the vision that you set forth as the founder? What have you learned about attracting talent to a startup such as TechSmarter?
It pays to be super picky and take your time. Often what happens is people get money and then they say, well, terrific. Now I can just go hire and fill a bunch of seats. And that's a bad way to go. It's far better. This goes back to my earlier statement about spend money slowly. It's far better to go through a process and get the right person. Ideally, what I do, I like to bring people in and start to work with them. Maybe they come in as a consultant. We develop a relationship. I get an understanding of how they think strategically. They get a sense of how I think strategically. We compare notes. At the end of the day, it's like getting married. You're going to spend 8 years with those people. You don't want turnover. So these are long-term hires. So think of it as dating. It's very much like when you're courting your wife. You go through a whole process. What you think changes over time, and it's very much the same in a startup. I've been on the board of RevJet now for 12 or 13 years. I know everybody, really well in terms of the management team. We have a lot of remote engineers I don't know, but I could tell you in great detail what the likely outcomes are going to be and how people are going to approach problems. And that's just because you do spend that much time together.
Mm. The workforce, the makeup of the workforce is obviously changing quite a bit. My experience talking to founders pretty much every day is that a lot of them struggle to find good talent, especially in the deep tech space in the US. Have you seen the nature of the labor workforce in the US change over the last few years?
Yeah, it's interesting. It used to be, in my experience, that people were excited about doing startups. They would want to come work for equity. They're happy to join. That's changed somewhat. There's still some enthusiasm, but there's a lot of push toward going part-time. They want to work on multiple opportunities. And so I find that it's harder to get somebody in full-time than it was. And so we have kind of a hybrid mix at times. The really key positions we hire full-time. There's no exceptions to that rule. But there are some ancillary positions that are of real importance. Those, through careful management and planning, you can do those on a part-time basis, and it is very effective. But you have to recognize the difference between the two and make sure that if you have a part-time person, they're not a gating item in any of the decision making. Really starts and ends with decision making. You got to make sure that you can swap out that component to that person if you need to.
Yeah, there's a big trend I've seen recently to this idea of like fractional CMOs or fractional CFOs or fractional COOs. And also, what I've heard is that the C suite talent pool has been knocked down from the C suite to like director roles. And in the startup space specifically, they can't afford to pay like 150, 200,000 a year for a CMO full time. So what they do is they, or even a financial person, operations person. And so they're fractionally paying for services that are high value in nature, but that they don't have to incur on like a ongoing full time basis. My question on that one is, do you see that as something being practical? Because it's like outsourcing is good in many cases, but there's certain things you just shouldn't outsource. Like you don't outsource like your engineering necessarily, because there's a whole reason that you can, but it causes problems, especially down the line when you're starting to raise money and you're starting to scale, and where's your IP and, and time differences and things like this. When should you outsource your talent or your particular requirements to fractional CMOs or CTOs, as an example? Is that something you recommend, and when should you do it?
Well, let's start with engineering. So I think that one of the most important roles is the CTO, and getting that right is critical to success. And so that's the one that I don't think you should outsource. You can build a lot of software engineering around an outsourced solution very effectively, particularly when you have outbound things like portals and others. There's groups out of Costa Rica that do fantastic work. And they're really integrated into your team. You sign a contract, you have them on board for, say, a year. And for all intents and purposes, they're an employee. But when the term of the contract comes up, the portal work ends, now you can just reduce that and you can divert that cash into, say, outbound marketing. As far as, what do you do about, CFOs and CMOs? My experience has been those are best outsourced early on. Particularly, I think people tend to overspend in finance. They worry a lot about it. That comes along. Really in the beginning, your focus should be on engineering. It should be focused on the product requirements. You really don't have revenue at that point, so it's a pretty simple exercise. You're really just focused on expense accounting. That's all it is. And you really have to write a monthly newsletter to investors, give them a detailed update as to what's happening, the company status. But there's no sophisticated accounting at that point. Where it really gets to be more of an issue is when you hit the accelerator, you're onboarding a lot of customers, and now you're dealing with things like service level agreements, and forecasting, accruals for down payments, all those kinds of things. Then it really pays to have somebody on board that's pretty strategic. You don't necessarily need to go all the way to a CFO. A director level works, but you probably want to have some oversight at the CFO level, and that's a good outsource opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that you've been on the board for RevJet for 12 years or so. When should a startup founder start to create a board? Like, when does it make sense in the life cycle of a startup?
Right away. So, and I don't want that to sound glib. Here's the problem that I see with a lot of startups. The temptation for an entrepreneur, especially a first-time entrepreneur, is to say, look, I don't want to get voted out. I've heard a million horror stories in Silicon Valley, and I want to keep control of this. And so the natural tendency is to say, I'm going to handpick a bunch of people that are going to support me at the board level, and it becomes kind of a yes man opportunity. That's not helpful, in my opinion. What happens is you're effectively running a one-person show. You're not getting the benefit of strategic input from people that have been there and done that. And so I encourage people, like, take a risk, go find people that actually have experience, that really understand the business imperatives, and get them in. You're not always going to like what they have to say, but listen to what they have to say and understand that there may be a point at which, yeah, it's your idea, it's your baby, but you may not grow with the company. That's a real possibility. It happens all the time. Bill Gates, one of the best decisions he ever made in his life was, he was a young guy. He said, I don't really know how to grow a business. And he went out and he hired the team that did. And he took a chance and he stood back, and it paid off incredibly handsomely for him. And it's very much the same thing here. I think it's super important that you don't get wedded to the idea that you have to go all the way through to the end cycle. It's about the opportunity and making money, in my mind. And so just be aware of that. And if you're going to be an impediment to that because you just don't have the right skill set, acknowledge it, and let a solution come in play that's going to get you where you want to be.
There was a crazy stat I saw recently that, like, I think I was on Founders Fund, Peter Thiel's website, something like 51% of founders who raise money with a VC are replaced within a 36-month period. What are your thoughts?
That, yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that should be because I think the thing for me that I'm always curious about is, like, there's a Silicon Valley narrative, like, you got to raise money, you got to, and there's, many, many companies that are like small giants. Burr Burlingham literally wrote the book about it. These are companies that are immeasurably profitable, and they're privately owned, never raised money, and, like, they're small giants. And so when you raise money, then you're now accountable sometimes to a board, right? So now it's like, oh snap. And the CEO, the role of a board member, from my understanding, is that they're there to not listen to the CEO, as an example. In some cases, they're there to hold him accountable to, like, governance or good governance, compliance, and stuff like this. But then sometimes the founders get replaced after a period of 3 years. So it's like, oh snap, like, I've lost my company, I've lost my baby. So I was going for the dream, but now I'm stuck with a chairman role, and I'm not actually involved in the business at all. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think every company has its challenges, and I have the utmost respect for engineers. Engineers have some of the most innovative ideas. That they do some incredibly creative startups. But given all of the depth of talent that engineering has, it's not uncommon that they haven't done any large scale selling. They don't understand what it takes to actually build up a real marketing organization, run campaigns over multiple channels, get a sales force that has a plan. What are the quotas? What are the goals for the quarter? What's the account review process look like? There's a million things that go on beyond engineering when you start to really roll out to the market, and it's incredibly expensive to learn that on the fly. Some people do it, and they do a very good job, but that's usually the exception. If you're a very successful company, you've got a lot coming at you at once. You've just introduced this marvelous gem to the world. The world's ready for it, but they're not going to wait for 2 years while you sort out all of the things that you didn't know about. And that's where the venture guys will sometimes say, look, it's time to put somebody else in. It's not a reflection of, it's not that you don't that you're not knowledgeable. It's that the market is outpacing your abilities. That's really what it comes down to. In most cases, the entrepreneurs keep their economics. So if you're in this to make some money, make an impact on the world, if you can curb your ego a bit and allow a team to bring that to fruition, it's still your baby. It's still your economics. But maybe you're not the guy that's making all the day-to-day decisions. In my view, so what? That's okay.
Yeah, I had this experience with my previous company. So we started scaling, and I just got to a point where I was like, you know what, this sucks.
It's a lot of work.
I'm tired of doing cultural stuff, dude. This is horrible.
Yeah.
And I'm like legit. I'm like, screw this. Like, I was having fun. Like, and now I'm not. And I think the interesting insight here is like you have to know what kind of founder you are, because I think there's this narrative of like, well, you got to raise money, become the next unicorn. But if you're not that guy, then you should accept the fact that you're probably not going to be at the steering wheel at a certain point, and you should be comfortable with that type of scale. Makes sense. Or you don't take the money at all and you just grow organically. And there's loads of SaaS companies that do this over like a 10-year window, 12-year window. And they're happy as Larry. Like they have no problems. They're in control. They're at the wheel and everything's cool. But my question to you, Eddie, is how do you figure that out? Like, how do you know what kind of scale is right for you? Because I've always found like you only know that once you're in it, and then you're like, oh shit, like I actually don't, this is not for me, I'm out. But if you haven't had that kind of scale but you're scaling, like how do you figure it out? Like what's your advice to a founder in that situation?
Before we go there, let's talk about motivation for a second. Kind of non sequitur. So I have a test that I use when I'm interviewing members of the management team. It's what I call the happy janitor test. And here's what I mean by the happy janitor. So I'll often ask candidates, okay, supposing you can be a janitor and you can push a broom and you get to name your price. But here's the quid pro quo for that. You can never tell anybody, not your girlfriend, not your wife, nobody, why you're a janitor. But you can name your price. So are you a happy janitor? Meaning, can you just go through life and recognize that at 5 o'clock I can go home and I can start a whole nother life with all this money I'm bringing in? For example, if I'm not saying this is possible, but if somebody came to me and said, I'll pay you $10 million to push a broom, I'd be a happy janitor. I could stand there with a smile on my face all day long and not care a whit what the rest of the world thinks. I'll sort it out in my own time. And it's that basic motivation that I wanted to talk about first, because it makes a big difference when you're talking about scale. I do very well working with people that are happy janitors. I don't do so well with people that say, well, oh, okay, yeah, but can I still be CEO, or can I have the title of something? Now it's a little less clear for me how the decision making is going to go. There's a lot of ego tied up in there. I'm not quite sure what your motivation is. If you're a happy janitor, it's a really simple motivation. I got it. I understand that. And I can predict 99% of the time what you're going to do. And that's very helpful. So it kind of comes down to that, because it's the same in scale. Back to your question, it's okay. So now I don't necessarily want to be the guy that sets all the HR handbook rules. I don't want to be figuring out a sales comp plan for everybody. It's not really that interesting to me. But it's got to be done. And so the question is it better to maximize my opportunity by putting people that already know it, that can keep up pace with the market, or should I, take a risk that I can keep pace with the market? It's really down to that kind of, what are you in it for? Are you in it for the money, or are you in it for something else? Like, do you want this to be a learning experience? That's okay. Just be honest with yourself and know that's what I'm doing it for. I want to build out my resume. Not particularly what I'd want to do, but it's certainly a very legitimate plan if that's what motivates you.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think the motivation is really, really key. Like, to your point, like, is this a learning thing for me, or is this like I'm going to do this over and over and over again? I'm going to build and sell, build and sell, build and sell. Or am I going to build, sell, and acquire, then scale and sell? And I think, it's knowing what type of founder you are. And I think oftentimes we're so busy in the trenches taking grenades every day, we don't actually tend to look up and actually ask ourselves the questions that really matter. Like, do I want this kind of scale? Because oftentimes it can really, put the founder in a context, in a situation where they're not capable, where their confidence starts to be eroded, and then ultimately, like, everybody loses as a consequence of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about that. And the other thing that I caution entrepreneurs about is they build companies for sale. You hit on the idea that maybe you're going to be a serial entrepreneur to do this on multiple times. I always think that's a recipe for disaster. I've seen it work a couple of times, but generally speaking, you're far better off developing a company that has a real revenue base and is growing. And along the way, if you've done all those things well, you'll get an exit strategy. They come along, right? That's not a problem. but that's the natural course of things. But the problem is when entrepreneurs say, no, I've got this great idea, it's really sexy, I'm gonna build this company, and I'm gonna get all the facade going, I'm gonna try and flip it. I've seen it a couple of times, but it generally does not work well. There's just, you can't survive the due diligence. Investors that are being asked to write a big check are pretty experienced folks. They know what they're doing, and they can see through it.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree with you more. I've learned that like I kind of can't be in a business for more than 3 to 5 years, and then I'm kind of like looking at the next thing. Or if my longevity or tenure as CEO is gonna be longer than that, then I need to have lots of products. You know what I mean? Like lots of challenges, lots of different things that I'm kind of looking at. But that's me. So I know now, like having sold a few companies and had a lot of failure along the way, like I see a gap, commercialize the gap, I'll build you a house. So you come buy the house from me, but I'm not going to build you a skyscraper. I'm not that guy. Like I don't have the skills to, take
Sure.
a 3 year vision and build a unicorn. I know you have those skills. But well, you do. Come on, let's be honest. but
I've
but
done a
but
few things, I'll say that anyway.
but the vision that you have for your life and the business as an extension of that is very, very important. What's your vision for TechSmarter? Like, where do you see TechSmarter going as a brand and as a team and as a company?
uh Look, if you're lucky doing venture capital, you might see 2, 3 unicorns in your career. This has the potential to be a real unicorn. I think that it's the right place at the right time, and you hit on this very early on when you were talking about the TED Talk. It really is a timing thing, and I would tell you that TechSmarter 5 years ago, there was opportunity there. It would have been a nice business, but that's not where we are today. There's a lot of pressure in the financial industry. There's a lot of pressure in the government agencies. Those are big motivating factors, and it's a different game. And I feel like there's tremendous scale to be had in that side. And I always thought it was a good investment. Obviously, I invested years ago, but um, I anticipated a much more a slower growth rate, but I don't think that's where we are right now. I think we're about to turn the corner and really hit the accelerator.
Hmm. So, what motivates you to be successful today?
Uh, what motivates me to be successful? I guess I'm just always motivated to make everything succeed. But um, look, it's a question. It's a question of timing. I think that this thing right now is in the right place, and I believe that to be so. And what's motivating me is it's getting out in front of that. It's like finding a big wave in Hawaii when you're out surfing. I think there's the big wave right there, and the question is, can you be at the right place at the right time to come down that face without having a mishap of any kind?
Hmm. If you cast your mind back to, if I could give you a time machine and go, here you go, go back to when you were 21, what's one piece of advice about business that you would give yourself as a 21-year-old?
Um, Boy, that's a really good question.
I'm so glad you said that.
I think the advice that I would give is, uh, well, first, recognize if you're truly an entrepreneur or not. I object to these college courses that have entrepreneur classes. I think you're either an entrepreneur, it's either in you genetically or it's not. So I think you have to really assess your capabilities and your mindset. Some people are hugely successful in larger corporations because they like being in a lane and they're very good at it and they're amply rewarded. They do phenomenally well. You take those same people and you drop them into a chair and you say, okay, now you're not just dealing with marketing, you're going to deal with engineering, you're going to deal with HR, all the other things that go into it. Some people like that and some don't. So entrepreneurship is about taking risk, and you have to understand that you're gonna make mistakes all the time. And the question is, you got to be comfortable with that, and you have to know that you'll figure a way out of it. Um, and that's a hard mindset. A lot of people are risk averse, and they suffer from analysis paralysis. And I think that the kiss of death for a small company is failure to make decisions and to stand still. The world won't wait. You've got to keep moving. Time kills all deals.
Yeah, it does. If you stand still, you're dead. Same thing with going to war. Like, oh, look, there he is. Bang, shot, dead.
Thanks.
You know, you're over. And,
Precisely.
so it's crazy. One more thing I'd love to ask you is, or two more things. One is, how do you know if are you born an entrepreneur or can you become one? Because I found like sometimes entrepreneurship is not a way up, it's a way out, which was my case. Like I needed out of a horrible situation. But
I would argue that was already in you. So you
yeah,
need it out because you have that skill set. You're not afraid to take risk. You're not afraid to go out and try new things. And in fact, you feel stifled just sitting there doing the same thing day after day. I think you said earlier, the longest I want to be involved in something is 3 to 5 years. That's an entrepreneur. That's really what that mindset is. And anytime you're changing, you're going to a new opportunity, there's risk involved in that. And that's why when people come to me and they say, look, I'm going to take an entrepreneur class, I've stopped listening. At that point, it's like, no, what, if you weren't already starting, a company and trying to figure it out, and you had to go to college to learn to do that, it's not in you. Mm. So Mitchell Wiseman is the CEO of RevJet, and he started an asphalt company in high school. It was very successful. Then a moving company. Then he went off and went to school, and then he went out and did venture capital. And then from venture capital, he moved to a very successful startup. So he's been around, but it was in him from the time he was probably 12 years old.
Yeah, it's true. So last question for you. Why do you do what you do? Like what gets you out of bed in the morning?
I live in mortal fear of being bored. I cannot stand the thought of being bored. If I'm not working on something and it's not piquing my interest, I lose my ever loving mind. So I'm motivated to talk strategy, and I find making business decisions fascinating. And at the end of the day, I have a whole barn full of machinery, and I go up there and start working on other things. It's just that thing of constantly like refreshing ideas and experiencing new things. So that to me is highly motivating.
Eddie Green, thank you for your time. Thank you
pleasure.
for talking about TechSmarter and giving the world of startups in my community around the world some insight into what you are doing and kind of what you've learned, not only from a VC perspective, but just as a founder, entrepreneur, and visionary trying to not get bored and do rad things. So.
Yeah, fair enough.
Thanks for being here, buddy. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, anytime. Pleasure.
Alrighty. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Ciao, ciao.